Hi, my name is Dan Gilmore. I want to thank you for joining us for this presentation on improving order fulfillment and omnichannel commerce. I was going to make the usual joke about the dreaded last presentation of the day, but I see that actually there is one presentation still to come today, so not quite the last, but appreciate you making it here. Just to give you my background a little bit, I've been running since 2003 a thing called Supply Chain Digest. Hopefully some of you at least out there have heard of it. But prior to that, I was actually Chief Marketing Officer at Red Prairie, which was a major software company and got ultimately acquired by JDA. I was the Chief Supply Chain Analyst at Metagroup, an analyst company that got bought by Gartner a number of years back, and actually spent a few years implementing WMS and TMS out in the field. So a little different than the average journalist, and I have some background. With me here today is Dinesh Dongre. He's a VP of Product Strategy at the software company called Softeon. It has made this broadcast possible. I think the next slide, did we pass that already? Right here. No, go back. So I have written, Supply Chain Digest is kind of part traditional trade press, part sort of analysty based on my background. And so I've been following from my purchase Supply Chain Digest Softeon for a number of years. And Dinesh and I have done a couple of events together and find we have sort of a commonality of thought about a number of different topics. So Softeon got a hold of me and said we'd like to jointly present something here at NRF, and I gladly said yes. And so here we are today. We're going to look at both, some issues from more of an end-to-end perspective, as well as drill down into some developments that you're probably not aware of in some individual areas like DOM and WMS. He's going to largely focus on technology, and I've been saying this for several years. It's omnichannel is different to me. We always have people, process, and technology, but if you don't have the technology in omnichannel, you just can't do it. It becomes very binary, okay? And so I think that's a little bit different. Yeah, there's people, yeah, there's process, but if you don't have the technology capabilities, it's hard to work around them from just a people or process perspective. So I think that makes things a little bit different. So again, I'm going to kind of cover some bigger picture trends or how I sort of see the problem or the opportunity, and then when we get to what can actually be done from a technology perspective, I think, again, some things you probably have not seen. Dinesh will cover most of those issues, and we may go back and forth a little bit here. So just a couple of quick introductory comments here. Obviously good enough that and I've worked with retailers in the past from a consulting perspective, sometimes good enough was good enough, and we're obviously past, those days. Certainly don't think brick and mortar retail is going away, but we're in some profound changes, and there's no question that some brick and mortar retailers are going away, and obviously we saw a lot of that in 2017. We're probably going to see more of it in 2018. So as I said, technology really matters. You can or you can't. I think there are two aspects to the technology. One is, can you do it or you can't, okay? And then the second one is, how flexible is your systems to change to rapidly evolving needs that really no one completely understands. What the customers don't even know today, what they're going to need 6 months from now or a year from now. So we need flexibility in our systems. Go back one more time, Dinesh. So we got to have things that are, both address the current needs we have for capabilities, but also provide some kind of ability for agility and extension over time. And so strategic IT design, therefore, becomes very critical. That's a big challenge with things as dynamic as they are now. How do you have a strategy when the world is changing, every month? But nevertheless, we have to put some of that thinking into place, I think, to have some success. So, okay, go ahead. So there are issues. Obviously, the amount of new functionalities that are being required, just go up on the show floor here, you see all of the different technologies that are being pitched out there to retailers, but that's driven by the new functionalities that are being required. You have a portfolio of existing applications. Obviously, people would like to leverage those, if possible, as best as they can. Same kind of thing with brick and mortar stores. Obviously, how do we best leverage those in an omnichannel context? Does a single integrated platform really exist? If you go up on the show floor, I actually did a video day one summary last night in my hotel room, got one out first thing this morning, and one of the kind of themes I said is, platform thinking. You're going to see a lot of signs out there that say platform this, platform that, or platform the other thing. There are platforms out there. We'll talk a little bit about that today. I'd say there's also pseudo platforms, meaning sort of not real platforms, sort of masquerading as platforms. It's really important to kind of drill down into that reality. And then what are the solution and integration costs? Obviously, we'd all like to have everything, but the reality of it is there's only so much we can invest and so much ROI that we can achieve, and so how do we sort of manage that whole equation? Very challenging in this domain. Okay, so I'm going to say some myths here, and I think Dinesh will kind of come back and later on and sort of talk in more detail about some of these, but So one of them, which is I just highlighted a second ago, that most so-called supply chain platforms really do have a common architecture and data model and are fully integrated. The reality is many of them are stitched together with some kind of a overarching thing that connects the different piece parts, but really it is a disparate technology platform. You really have to do some work to figure out whether what you have is looking at is real or not real. This may be a little bit controversial, but I say integration to existing and third-party systems is extremely hard and expensive. I don't go so far as I'd say it's easy, but for some companies, and I'd put Softeon in that camp, there's some others, it's not as hard as maybe we've often been told and the price tag that we see. If it's done the right way, integration is a challenge, but it is not as a huge leap or mountain as is sometimes positioned in the marketplace. Distributed order management, or DOM, which is becoming kind of the heart of omnichannel fulfillment, is just about order sourcing and picking the smartest place to fulfill that order. It does that for sure, and we'll get into some more detail, but DOM can do a lot more than that. We're going to talk about that today. It's really interesting to see to me how DOM has moved from sort of a niche thing not that many years ago to now being sort of the hub of omnichannel commerce. WMS is fully mature. You're going to hear a lot of WMS vendors out there say we've solved that problem. We solved that problem 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. Many people are not putting that much money back into WMS because they think they've solved the problem. What do we need, another pick method? No, we got 12 of them, that's enough. I think that's short-sighted, and I think there are a number of areas where WMS can continue to be enhanced and benefit retailers and omnichannel commerce. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And then again, as I said today, that to get there is going to cost many, many, many millions. It's going to cost some money, but it doesn't have to cost maybe as much as some of the price tags that I hear being quoted out there in the marketplace. So when we talk about platforms, again, I said I think there's real platforms, there's kind of pseudo platforms. So obviously, to start out, you got to have the right capabilities to meet your current and future vision functionality requirements. You need certain things today. You are very highly confident you're going to need certain things tomorrow. So it needs to be able to do that. But again, as I said, you want to be able to leverage what you already have to the extent that you can. All right? You don't want to have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. These are things that people are used to using. You spend a lot of money on them and pay them off and no more, whatever. You want to the extent possible, be able to continue to use what you have in a fairly easy fashion. Minimize IT deployment and maintenance costs over time, and allow for easy and strategic extension of that over time. And I think Dinesh is going to talk about that here in just a second. So next slide.
I think when you look at the platform, I think to the point is why is a platform, or what is a true platform, why is it beneficial? I think there's 2 or 3 key components that come into play. One is, if it's a genuine platform, it should allow the ability to add capabilities on without necessarily going through a re-implementation effort. So you should not have to re-implement in order to extend the capability. A true platform should allow for that. It's like a building foundation. You should be able to add another floor without having to redo the foundation. And the second piece is it should allow for time to market. It should allow for ability to do that in a real, in a fashion that is time to value, very quick, and still supportive of business needs, not necessarily having to be disruptive in enabling that capability. And the last piece is, can it leverage existing assets? So you still have to minimize your cost of ownership, technology cost of ownership. So all 3 components have to be addressed, and a genuine platform should and will support that capability. So as an example of when you look at a platform, and there are multiple paradigms today, so I'm not necessarily saying that an SOA-enabled platform is the only way to do that, but that is the most proven approach to extensibility and scalability that you see in the market today across all vertical segments.
Just be SOA, service-oriented architecture, which is kind of componentization of the functionality within the suite.
So if you look at a landscape in any enterprise, so you have lots of different systems, whether it's over time that has been implemented, whether it's homegrown, whether it's sourced externally as an independent product, and it's just a sample visualization here. So if you decide to implement a platform to support new solutions, and here's the context we say we start with the DOM, and primarily we're talking of DOM only because it gives you the maximum ability to be least disruptive. Meaning if you have a multi-facility landscape whether the facilities are distribution centers or store nodes that you can now, because of the omnichannel, that you can treat as fulfillment centers in certain contexts. Each of them is a node in your network. In order to be able to facilitate optimization across those nodes, you need to have something that is not specific to the node, meaning a WMS that works in a facility or an in-store application. Trying to attempt to use that but benefit across the other nodes is always going to be hard. So the key is to do something that is central, that can facilitate that across the network, and DOM provides that. And we talked about DOM being source. We will talk a little bit more about DOM, how it does beyond just order sourcing. So context here is if within your landscape, if you want to now look at enabling omni-channel rather than look at a channel-specific requirement, how do you strategically enable the enterprise to be omni-channel capable, not just for today, but as the consumer demands and things are changing over the future, how do you facilitate, how do you set yourself up to be successful? You would start with an example as a DOM layer that would be implemented in the context of your existing infrastructure. So and again, the integrations is part of the key. When you look at DOM, yes, you could have adapters for individual ERPs, and most of you probably have experienced that, you have an adapter for an ERP, and as there is a new version, then you have to upgrade to a new version of the adapter. It becomes intrusive. So if you have non-intrusive integration, which we talked earlier about why integration is not that hard, it is critical, but it's not hard, is by doing something that is non-intrusive. And that's where, why SOA is more prevalent today in terms of distributed architecture is because it is non-intrusive, because there is just a contract between applications, between collaborators that you sign up, and as long as each party signs up that for contract, and the rest of it, how it is actually executed or implemented is immaterial. So having a DOM in there with an abstraction layer that allows you to integrate very easily with your existing infrastructure gives you the best option to leverage existing assets, but still enable that strategic move that you want to make going forward. So that's a stage one, if you will, from a platform perspective that it could accomplish. The next would be, once that is done, if you wanted to go to the next, so you could look at a facility-specific thing. So some retailers or companies have landscapes that are dedicated e-fulfillment centers. Some take a common facility that they can handle both the e-fulfillment, e-commerce versus regular retail fulfillment. So you have the option to now look at optimization within your network to say, I want to leverage a certain component within the four walls now, as opposed to being more across the network. So the platform should enable now migrating that component to the next generation or a newer generation or a newly capable system. And in this example, we're just talking of WMS as an option to say, now I have a platform with the least disruptive approach that you have implemented to enable, and then you can now migrate or enable individual silos within those supply chain threads with newer capability, be it technology, be it trends that you have to support, be it customer demands. So that one flavor of that is replacing an existing infrastructure or an asset with a new generation asset. The other context of a platform is to introduce new assets, so which you did not have today. Can you still do that with least disruption? So here's an example where we say we could probably include some kind of a labor management or a VMI a solution that you can introduce into your platform now. Again, with the context again is the same, time to market, very quick, lower cost or optimized cost of investment. So all of those tenets are continuing to be followed as you extend this. So that's what that platform enables. So here is an example of where you're adding on new assets. The last piece is, which not necessarily is not easy to visualize on a pictorial, but an SOA type approach, what it also enables you to do is extract components out of your existing asset, not just replace the entire asset. There may be certain parts of your asset that you can benefit from, that you can leverage parts of it but extend that capability. So for example, if you just had forecasting, but you didn't have the component to extend that to do any components around like merchandising or inventory planning or looking at lead times and things like that, you can introduce that in the platform as a new component, but still use part of your existing component. It doesn't have to be a full replacement. So it allows you to do all three of those things. Introduce this over time, replace existing components, or extend existing components with newer capabilities.
Very good. Yeah, and just that last point, one of the things I found interesting about the Softeon solution is Dinesh just said there, but to give an example, so as I understand it, Dinesh, you can take a DOM solution, which does what it does,
right,
and then if you need parcel rating from the TMS, you don't have to implement the whole TMS. You can just take that parcel rating component and attach it to the DOM, and voila, you've got the functionality.
Correct, that's right. Yes, yes.
Okay, very good. All right, so with that kind of as the introduction on the platform thinking now, we're looking at some things that retailers are looking for. Obviously, all of us are looking to reduce total delivered and fulfillment costs, and you still got to meet the customer experiences and goals and commitments and all that stuff. The two prominent applications, I guess, if you will, in doing that are DOM, as we've mentioned already several times now, and WMS. We're talking about some interesting developments in WMS. Next slide, Dinesh. So, I assume most people in the room know what distributed order management is. It traces its roots all the way back to the late 1990s. Actually, the first version of what I saw was from a company called Yantra many, many years ago. I too then came up with something, but that kind of, I think, went away. So, there's a short definition here, and I don't remember where I got these definitions from, but, delivers integrated planning and execution across multi-echelon, multi-party, and multi-channel supply chain networks. I think we actually created that definition here. So that's one thing. There's a longer definition, I think, that came from maybe Deloitte. I'm not going to read through this whole thing. It says DOM does all kinds of different stuff. But the point was, and I think I said at the beginning of sort of the miss, was that DOM is only related to optimal order sourcing. It does a whole lot more. The right DOM in the right hands is more of a Swiss Army knife that has a myriad tools to it that can solve all kinds of different problems, not just outbound optimization, but actually the inbound optimization we're going to talk about in a second. So the point just really is, as you're looking at DOM, look rather broadly at what all it might be able to do for you. You might not start out that way to begin with, but don't sort of limit the vision of what DOM might do. Not every DOM has these capabilities, and some DOMs have some of this and some of that or whatever, but I would say almost every time people are selling DOM a little short, at least in the beginning, about what the benefits to their supply chain and order fulfillment might be. So, if you don't well understand DOM or new to DOM or whatever, Dinesh, I think is going to take us through at a high level, some of the functionalities that goes into a modern DOM solution.
Yeah, I think, again, when you look at DOM, because it's a central core component, order sourcing, optimizing from where you want to fulfill, make that decision is one component of that. That is a DOM feature if you think about it. Now, can you extend that DOM set? Because it is now central in an infrastructural perspective, it is a core of your, technical enabler. So can that be extended? That's what, like every other product, you look at what is the opportunity to improve that. So when we look at DOM, the opportunities to do the same kind of optimization on the inbound is there. So if you look at the omnichannel, context today, I mean, that's relevant to all of you guys. So sometimes you make static choices in terms of whether it's a retail fulfillment or e-com fulfillment. You have to make some choices ahead of time. If in the most simplistic case of like a cross-stock, when products come in, do you say I'm allocating for this? I'm going to cross-stock. So everybody says cross-stock is an important criteria for either a WMS or DOM. But if DOM, as a central piece on a platform, had the ability to look at your store sales, look at the demand patterns in each of those things, it has the ability to then auto-route without having to make those decisions out of time on the fly dynamically. It can make decisions of inbound, material coming in to say which node does it have to be, do you have to maintain the inventory? So it's just a different way of thinking DOM, but when we talked, the whole notion of this conversation was to say fulfillment by design. So it is, what we're hoping that you will be able to do is look beyond the traditional boundaries of product definitions. So can you extend, because it's a rule engine, it is central to your tool, can you extend that to this? So one part is the inbound thing. The same extension is to do with vendor collaboration. So there is a benefit in making products retail ready, more retail ready when they come from manufacturers. So can DOM be used to collaborate with your suppliers? So you have visibility to the POs, you have visibility to what is in manufacturing, you have visibility to what is being shipped. Can they print labels off a common platform so you can make it more retail ready before it's even being shipped to your warehouse? All of that can be facilitated from a very core component, which is now DOM, or what we call the next generation DOM, as opposed to the traditional where we just took an order from multiple sources and figured out which is the lowest cost from meeting the SLA where we could fulfill it from. These are just examples of why it is critical, or why a DOM can be viewed in different ways. Is a big piece of that is rule engine, and the rule engine is going to be critical primarily because you need that agility. Whether it is introduction of a new product or signing up with a new contract with a new carrier that you want to leverage, a new market that you want to be in. Any and all of those things don't have to be a significant effort in terms of enabling once you have a technology platform that supports that. So the rule engine is a significant component of it, and the more robust it is, the more dynamic can your behavior be. So whether it is a simple weather pattern that says, okay, there is a snowstorm, one of your facilities is going to be only working at half the capacity or 1/4 the capacity that you normally do. Dynamically, if you can define a rule saying, okay, my constraints on that facility is now 1/4 of what it used to be, the rules of even at the most simplistic level, routing the orders to the other facilities to take up that slack dynamically, just because that's an event that's going to happen for 2 days or a pattern weather event that's likely to occur in 2 days, you can do that dynamically and roll it back. Once that event is done, when the facility is at full capacity, you roll it back to your original rules. You need to be able to do that dynamically without having to involve IT, without having to involve another vendor to come in and say, well, we need to do this. A good rule engine will allow you to do that. The businesses can make the decision. The facility level, they have to be able to make that choices.
Yeah, and
that's what it allows.
make a quick comment. I've talked to many companies that have implemented DOM, including a number of Softeon customers, and I mean, you think about it, the session, this omnichannel fulfillment by design, you now have the power in your hands, really, to architect the way you want your fulfillment network to operate. That's a tool that people haven't had before, right? Well, if somebody just hands you this and say, okay, go ahead, what are the rules? That doesn't just happen, right? It takes a lot of thinking. And what I'm finding is that companies tend to start at one level of sort of sophistication and nuance and get the big picture stuff right. And then as they learn over time, they keep, making those rules more granular and sophisticated, but also learning by experience about what's working and what's not working. Then, of course, you have different changes, which stores can fulfill, which stores can't, all that stuff. But this is really a powerful change in supply chain technology that users now have, not the IT side of the house or the vendors' IT people, but users themselves have the power to configure their supply chain the way they want it to work, very, very different than we've had in the past.
So this is just another example of what the rule engine is. It gives you multiple hierarchies, so we don't need to dwell a whole lot, but just, from a context to understand that when we talk rule, it has to be it is almost has to be something that gives you the flexibility to define things in the context of a business domain, meaning we're trying to eliminate the requirement for IT skills, requirement for technology skills in order to be able to do that. So the closer you get to the business in terms of defining your rules, the closer it gets. And here's an example of where an order is dropped to a DOM. DOM, the sourcing rules typically go from, okay, which region, where am I shipping it to, is which one do I need to use, which DC, you can set up defaults. Then you go, well, in the omnichannel context, you're saying I also have the ability now to buy online, ship from store, buy online, pick up at store, any of those contexts, if you want to enable that, right? It's not, you don't have to stop the business or you don't have to make that a big project. With a DOM layer, you can now enable a node to say this node is now eligible to be serving as a fulfillment opportunity. And again, extend that with the constraints. So on a weekend, you don't want everything to be dropped at the store because you want foot traffic. You want the store to be focused on foot traffic and not worry about fulfilling e-com orders. But on a lean period, you can have DOM drive the orders to the store saying, okay, now you can pick up or fulfill from the store. So you have to be able to do this dynamically. And these decisions typically are made by business because they're looking at opportunities. Store traffic is not great. You have an opportunity, leverage it. And so you don't have to wait for a third party or a vendor or a technology asset to come in to help make those choices.
Okay, very good. Again, DOM to me is one of the most impactful applications that's been added to the supply chain in a good long while. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about WMS. Again, as I said, many WMS vendors, I've implemented WMS. I worked for a WMS vendor for a long time, so I know the space very, very well. Done many how to select a WMS webinars in my day. Again, I think there's been some static nature of WMS in some cases where we think we solved that problem, move on to other stuff. But we all know that order profiles are changing. E-commerce by definition is kind of each is picking, very different for some facilities or whatnot. In order to address, and of course the cost of that now becomes very high because piece picking is a heck of a lot more expensive than case picking, which is in turn a lot more expensive than pallet picking. Okay, so distributors of all kinds, including retailers, have been looking for ways to address those picking costs, and so we have all kinds of adoption of new technologies. Voice picking, hugely prominent these days. These so-called intelligent pick carts, You may be familiar with the concept of put walls, pick-to-light systems, et cetera. So there's all these subsystems that are being implemented out there in order to reduce labor and increase productivity in the distribution center. The problem, however, is that number one, often this is expensive proprietary hardware from a number of these vendors. And you have to have costly third-party software in most cases that must in turn integrate with the WMS. And then as a result of that, you have a lack of optimization opportunities and inflexibility. I'm going to explain that in a second. So you may or not be aware of this, but all of these kind of systems, voice, go ahead and advance this. One more back.
Yeah.
One more back. No?
No, that's the one.
Well, it's supposed to build. So I'm not quite sure what happened.
It'll
There we
build
go.
later, yeah.
Okay, so all of these systems, whether it's a put wall, whether it's a pick-to-light, whether it is a intelligent cart, whether it's going to be, frankly, order-picking robots that are wandering the warehouse floor in the very near future, they all today have their own control system. What basically happens is the WMS takes its orders, throws it over the wall to the put wall system, or throws it over the wall into the cart system, or the voice system, whatever. They do the execution of the order picking, and then they throw the results back to the WMS for confirmation, all right? There's a number of problems with that. Go ahead, now go to the next one. So, number one, it makes the hardware itself a lot more expensive. Why? Because you've taken fairly commodity hardware and turned it into something proprietary because of these control systems that are sitting on top of it. It means you have to build interfaces from the WMS into these third-party control systems, and it really precludes the ability to optimize the total flow from slotting and replenishment and picking, looking at the whole picture and being able to handle exceptions, because it's really not being operated on in real time by the WMS. It's being operated on in real time within the subsystem, but kind of a batch nature between the WMS and the third-party software. So I think this is a real opportunity. Softeon has done something very interesting here, and I'm going to let Dinesh talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, you know, the key things that you saw in terms of the challenges, I mean, that's what, you know, we believe from a WMS perspective, that should be part of a WMS. Now, there is this notion of extended WMS, but the reality is that the dynamics of within the facility change, the order profiles are different, you know, the seasonal, you know, demands are different. What needs to happen within the facility can change over time. And so in order to be flexible, in order to do that, you know, whether you're, you know, for your peak season, you're trying to use, you know, voice pick, or you have profile where you're doing a lot more e-com fulfillment versus retail that you want to do stuff. So the ability from within a WMS to be able to drive these things as native capability without having to have third-party software, that is going to be the key, because the benefits with using these systems is all clear. The question is, what is the most effective way to benefit from these systems? The more interfaces, the more additional components of software that is there, it basically leads to multiple vendors, it involves to overheads in terms of management and support, and it involves the time and cost. So the more native the support is from within a WMS to be able to do voice, you know, so traditional voice, you know, equipment and voice systems that are out there have very defined behavior. It's usually picking, replenishments, put away in some cases. You can do all of those process definitions in voice. But what if you could extend voice to say, a supervisor should be able to say, give me this hot order, I want to know the status of this. What is it that if, from a blue collar to a white collar, maybe it's not the best way to explain it, but if you transition voice as a way to look at behavior within, you know, the facility, what if you could enable voice capability for that? I mean, we see that today with whether it's a Siri or a you know, Cortana or whatever, where you are voice-enabled command. So what if you had that opportunity to do that within a WMS? And again, driven in the context of being able to manage the workflow within the you know, WMS effectively. So that is hugely beneficial instead of looking for a third party, because that software does what its core competency is. So involving that, because WMS is capable of doing all of this stuff natively, now we are only extending that to say, I want to be able to do a voice, as opposed to go and hit a query button to say, show me the order status. I should be able to inquire. So the native functionality is there. Now we're extending that to be doing this. So that is what the extended WMS features are going to bring for, as an example.
Yeah. Just illustrating that, go ahead.
Yeah, this is,
so the key thing of this slide is that you'll notice that third-party software is the same diagram before, but that third-party control software is gone, okay? In this case, in Softeon's case, they are controlling all of these subsystems excuse me, pick voice, pick to light, put walls, et cetera, carts directly without that third-party software. What that does is take the cost out of the hardware, because the hardware is not that complicated. It's only complicated because it's got the software. Okay, it means you get rid of interfaces to all these systems, both currently and over time, and it allows you to do, again, as I said, that advanced optimization where you're looking at the whole flow of the order, not just the picking part, but the slotting, the replenishment, et cetera, and be able to manage exceptions.
So, I mean, this is just a summary of what we were just talking. What does it give? I mean, you know, at the end of the day, what it does is if the WMS, as long as you can pull that natively in, I mean, these numbers are pretty real. You know, if you had third-party software, you know, the cost of the software, the maintenance cost on an annual basis, you know, the hardware. Now, hardware, one can argue, may not be changing significantly from a price point perspective, but everything else typically can be, you know, significantly reduced. So we're looking at huge, you know, reduction in technology costs in terms of investment that you have to do to be able to, you know, have that capability to support the business needs. There are some other extensions within WMS that you can think about that will help from an e-com, from an omni-channel perspective, only primarily because the different channels have different characteristics. So when you look at picking, when you look at receiving, when you look at fulfillment, when you look at customer service, any and all of those dimensions that happen within the supply chain process, because of the channel have its own vagaries or nuances that need to be addressed. And you know, that's the only reason that there were e-com only distribution centers. So why can't it be in one place? Why can't you manage all of your distribution from a facility, irrespective of the channel? Why do you have to have inventory silos? So when you look at opportunities to reduce your total delivered cost, so all of these things, you know, the native capability we talked about, ability to have within a platform in-store solutions, so you have managed perpetual inventory, which can mean that you can be more effective at store replenishments, more effective reducing back orders. So there's a lot of things that inherently become part of that context. So this is just a few examples, but that's something that maybe as you look through, you know, opportunities, look for, you know, tools and technology enablers that you challenge it to be doing a bit more than it would normally do.
So, you know, what are omnichannel retailers really trying to achieve? Just added to this first thing about reducing total delivered cost, obviously meeting and exceeding expectations for the customer experience. This is a framework, the next slide. This is a framework that I developed a number of years ago. I said you got think about three sort of, you know, main concepts. There's what I call points of interaction. These are the places where the customer is going to interact with you and ultimately place an order, whether that's in store, whether that's a kiosk, whether that's online, whether it's on mobile, whether it's your television set, whether it's a subway station in Tokyo, and a virtual reality screen. All of these things are very real and they need to be supported. Then there's points of fulfillment, where all the different places that orders can be fulfilled from within the extended network. Obviously, that's my own DCs, that's third-party DCs, that could be the store, that could be my vendors, that could be et cetera, okay? And then lastly, points of return, and this is something that, you know, we're probably all feeling still a little bit of the pain from over the Christmas vacation, or Christmas holiday, of all the flood of returns that are heading back into our stores and into our distribution centers. So I call these POIs, points of interaction, POFs, points of fulfillment, PORs, points of return. And what you have to do, obviously, is figure out which combinations of those do I need to technically enable. Because if you don't technically enable them, as I said earlier, the manual workarounds are very, very difficult indeed. And this is something that DOM really plays the central role at, is being able to achieve these integrations between POIs, POFs, and PORs without expensive rewriting of the applications that you already have. Next slide. That's very powerful, fundamental, but very powerful to me. I mean, so
the main thing is the customer experience. You know, context there is, you know, and today most brick and mortar stores are trying to figure out a way, you know, whether it's an Amazon acquisition of Whole Foods, any of those. You need a touch point. You need the ability, a satisfaction for customers to be quickly able to return, pick up, whatever you want to call it. You know, with a central infrastructure, now you can enable that. You had a store, now you can have ship from anywhere, but you can return to the stores. To be able to leverage that point of return, so to Dan's point, the point of return, point of fulfillment, and the point of the influx that's coming in, all of them have to be collectively looked at to optimize your assets as best as you can. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's great. No, you go ahead and talk about order orchestration.
Yeah. So this is just, you know, what does, again, when you think about this is from a process perspective. One is the assets, physical assets for how you are going to leverage within your network. This, in order to be able to do that, then the overall process also has to be orchestrated the right way, in terms of whether, so in the most simplistic case, when the order comes in, we talked earlier about, is it appropriate for it to be fulfilled from the store? Is it the right timing for it to be fulfilled from the store? Or do you always inventory products that are slow movers? Can you do a drop ship? Can you just have vendors ship that product as opposed to you inventorying and carrying that cost on you? To make those choices, the order fulfillment, the overall process has to be orchestrated the right form. And then when the returns come, the same way happens. When your returns are coming in, you're looking at your network, where is it best inventoried when the returns come in? Do they all be, if it's summer here, do you move to the East Coast, do you move to the West Coast? Those choices have to be made, again, in the context of rule engine and orchestrating an overall process flow, as opposed to the individual components that, typically you would see the WMS that handles the return or a return system that handles something. If that is part of a context, then you could look at it more holistically and make choices, not just within that process segment, but overall process cycle.
And I'll just add, the fact that this can now be done, it's actually quite amazing, right? We simply did not have a tool like DOM, anywhere near in the past that would allow us to get that kind of visibility to both, inventory and constraints and orders, and be able to make really smart decisions based on parameters that you decide and that can actually change by the day, as Dinesh said earlier, or by period or whatever. The fact that this kind of capability is now in our hands is a real game changer. It's no wonder why DOM is frequently, if not usually, the starting point in terms of omnichannel enablement.
So there are other aspects, again, based on, from a business profile that, something that Central can enable, substitutions. Subscription business is a big deal now. So there is a native capability within that to look at subscription profiles, to mix and match, to create orders automatically. All of those can be done. And again, the notion with this is not that it is new. It is, the question is, can it be done on a single platform that gives you that flexibility to add that capability as and when you need it, with the speed that you would need it. That's the key in all of these things.
Very good. Okay, so lastly, we're going to just talk about, what are some things you need to do. Certainly want to enhance and best, capable automate decision making and move from a reactive in this kind of environment to a more proactive scenario here. And Dinesh is going to go back. We talked about that inbound optimization using DOM. I like to think about, getting ahead of Dinesh a little bit here, but think about this inbound problem is just like reversing the DOM flow. So rather than from the facility out to the best, optimizing the facility sourcing choice out to the market, this is just taking that logic and saying, from an inbound perspective, what's my right way to push it across the network?
Yeah. So this basically, when you look at the context of a retail landscape, if you look at typical retail landscape, you have you have your suppliers, you have your customers, you have different ways to source customer demand. You have your different fulfillment options. You have different touch points with your customer. All of this is typically any retail landscape. The size and complexity may vary, but in theory, you have most of these things. In order to be able to do across, so when we say reactive, proactive versus reactive, in theory, you could say, oh, there is no inventory in the store, so I can either do a back order or I can fulfill. But how it would be so much more nicer if you had visibility into demand and the sales at the store, that you would auto refill. You would be able to trigger automatic store replenishments based on the patterns of sales that's going on. Or if you did a campaign, if you did a promotion, how do you balance for a certain period of time for a certain set of products that you want to make certain choices outside of your typical network choices. So in order to be able to do that, that's where a DOM with components. So when we talk about the platform, so DOM was one piece of that. DOM by no means is the platform, the retail platform. You have the forecasting side, you have the planning side. When you talk about new product introductions, there are things like milestone management. So there is a whole set of collaborative things that you have to do before you introduce your new product to the market, right? From concept, design, before it actually hits the street. So there is a lot of that collaboration that can be effectively done. So you have an entire industry around S&OP process that says, what is my initial one number forecast? What do I manufacture the first time? But what if that was part of a platform where it would flow into choices that you have to make for procurement, choices of where do you position that inventory across your network, even that initial manufacturing order? Where is the campaign likely to be more effective? What if there was an option on a platform that you could make all of those choices, including collaborating with suppliers, making it retail ready, handling procurement, doing the execution and fulfillment, working with the customers, interacting, providing them the customer service, order status, any and all of those? That, to us, is the definition of a retail platform, because all of that is a requirement. It's not a choice, it's a requirement that you do effective and optimally in all of those threads in order to be able to be the best in what you do or differentiate yourself. And if there was an ability, a platform that allowed you to do that holistically, but also leverage your assets, leverage what you did well, what worked well in your environment, and extend that to provide the rest of it, that would be the ideal end game. So this is just some slides. I think we have just less than 4 minutes left, so just wanted to leave a couple of minutes for any Q&As or final thoughts. So these are just some context in terms of the platform capabilities. So this is, there might be other products that you're using that do these things well, but what we're talking about, being able to do that on a common platform.
Okay, so that brings us to the end. Covered a lot of ground, I realize, and there's only so much you can do in a 45-minute session here, but hopefully you get some context of all that's going on from a technology perspective, and you might want to be considering when you look at your solution environment. You need, in this kind of incredibly challenging and dynamic environment, I do think you need some kind of platform that's going to maximize your capabilities and flexibilities while minimizing IT costs associated with that. You need to be able to connect and enable those POIs, POPs, and PORs, as I talked about. You need to be able to manage the environment that you've got on a cost-effective basis, and you need to be able to easily extend that so that the cost of integration doesn't provide a giant barrier to moving forward where you want to go. DOM systems are the heart of order fulfillment, but they can do a lot more beyond just low-cost vendor sourcing, as we've been talking about here the last few minutes. I talked about WMS vendors kind of staying pat with their WMS solutions, but I think, when you saw some things Dinesh was talking about there, and there's more going on. There's some WMS development isn't dead. Let me just put it that way. There's a lot more that can happen, and I think drive a lot of value. And I do think, integrated planning and execution is really the new paradigm. That's easy to say, but I think we're starting to really embrace that notion here. Some of what Softeon does is what I'd call execution planning. It sort of sits between traditional supply chain planning and traditional supply chain execution in a kind of a white space. We didn't really cover it in detail today, but it's kind of related to the plan to fulfill that Dinesh showed there, but it really answers some questions that I think are essential for order fulfillment that we haven't had before, again, filling a white space. So I want to thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed the show and this presentation.
One thought, if I could leave one thought, this is traditional space that we've talked about. If you think about IoT and stuff over the last 2-3 years, you've heard a lot about IoT, and obviously a lot of it is on the manufacturer side to enable stuff before it even comes to the shelves. But if you had a platform that would support, again, it needs to be technically feasible. It is, by no means is it rocket science, but it's, again, future-proofing your investment. With all of these platforms, what we're saying is when you invest in a technology platform, can it keep abreast with the trends? Can it keep abreast with the things that you can leverage? So is it a sustainable investment? So if you look at IoT, a simple thing of, heart monitor or, some kind of a thing where a life cycle of its own where you need it to automatically renew, a battery needed to be sent instead of somebody having to remember and look at that. If the device was enabled where it automatically triggered when a battery level was down, it would trigger an automatic, an event, and a platform could, consume that event and automatically create an order and ship that battery out. That would be, it is not too far in the future. It will happen. Obviously it's taken a little longer because it starts from the manufacturing side, but a platform that allows you to be able to do that. I mean, it's omnichannel is one piece of it, but in the omnichannel space, if you're in the business of doing peripherals or selling peripherals or any of those consumer packaged goods or anything to do with that, that's an opportunity to think about. So this is food for thought. So a platform ultimately is essential to keep in touch with the trends and not just be something that you solve today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so miraculously right on time. We're wrapping it up here. You see the contact information here. If you want a copy of these slides, I don't know what NRF makes them available. I'm not sure the answer to that. But if you want a copy of the slides, you can either email either one of us here or come up and give us your business card, and we will promptly send you a copy of the presentation. If you have any questions publicly or you want to walk up to the stage, I will just say parenthetically, I happen to know Softeon is doing what Dinesh talked about today at a number of omnichannel retailers, and if you want to learn a little bit more about that, we couldn't mention them here today, I guess, for confidentiality reasons, but I think privately you can probably talk about that. So again, thanks you for joining us today. If you want the slides, you see the information there, come contact us, and any questions, just come on forward, and we'll be happy to take them.
Thanks very much.
Thanks
Thank
much,
you very
everybody.
much. Yeah.